I didn't know what I didn't know while I was in the classroom until I moved out and focused every day on writing great assessments and learning those best practices. I want to kind of share a little bit about what great assessments can look like and how they can help you.
So wait, first, is it look at a test and see if there's 10 questions because it's easy to grade?
Well, I mean, if it's sometimes you want to give short ones. Like, that's not always a bad thing, but that's not your primary criteria.
Welcome to Education Uncharted. As teachers, we know that assessment is part of our daily lives. We use assessment all the time, but what we'd like to discuss today is how do we use assessment? Are we using it effectively? And how do we use assessment to drive instruction to meet the needs of individual students?
I'm Amanda.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is Education Uncharted. So, Lisa, let's start by talking about embedded assessments. This is a term that maybe we know because we've written a lot of curriculum content, a lot of pieces that coordinate with, what students are, they're aiming to learn, anything that they need to be able to do by the end of a lesson. But I don't know that teachers always recognize that terminology. So let's talk about what embedded assessments even are, and then we can dig into the ways that we can use them as educators. First of all, if an assessment is embedded, that means that it's within the learning content that you're doing. It's not a summative assessment. It's not necessarily a quiz or a final exam. It's not maybe even like a bell ringer or an exit slip. It's the thing that students are doing as they are working through whatever it is that you are really focusing on learning in the class that day. Is there anything else that I should add to that description, Lisa?
Well, when I think about assessment in general, we separate between formative and summative assessments, but we need to think about how assessments are like a photograph, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so assessments are only a snapshot. And if we only take that snapshot of what's happening, maybe in the middle of a unit or at the end of the unit, we're not seeing the whole picture. So we actually need like a photo album, right? Where we need to see it in, your candid shots. We need to see it in different contexts. We need to see assessments that some are written, some are oral, some are active, some are individual, some are with groups, because we are looking at the entire picture. So we're used to giving those quizzes and those tests and then saying, okay, did they get the knowledge? And that's great for knowledge acquisition, knowledge building, getting to know, did they get the knowledge? But we also need to see, how are they using that knowledge? How are they applying that knowledge? And that's where our embedded assessments come in. Can they actually take that knowledge and do something with it?
Fantastic. So why, as a teacher, would I need to consider doing, making sure that these assessments are happening during the course of a week, not just, as a bookend?
Well, I mean, first of all, the whole purpose of assessment for a teacher is to drive instruction, right? So we need to know, what do we teach next? And of course, we have our scope and sequence. We have our standards. We have our unit that we are going to teach. But if we just keep doing day in, day out and doing what we're supposed to be doing as teachers, but we're not taking into account what the students are actually getting, then are we actually teaching, or are we just moving through the paces? Are we just following a script? And teaching is not about a script. Teaching, there's nothing about education that can absolutely be part of a script. We need to use student interaction to inform our decisions. So we teach, even if we're teaching something, vocabulary. So we break down the vocabulary. We look at associated words. We use it as a sentence. We use it in a different sentence. We say the word. We look at this vocabulary. We want to use that vocabulary in context. So now that vocabulary is going to be part of our reading. But if the kid didn't actually get the vocabulary, they're just saying the word,
they're not going to get the reading.
They're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's little things like that, having them repeat it back to you and saying, now you said in a sentence, tell your friend about it. Did they get it? Have them correct each other. And it doesn't even have to be written. It doesn't have to be anything big. It's just.
So this doesn't have to go into a grade book.
Oh, no, it's absolutely not. And we should definitely talk about that as well, about formative assessments. Do any formative assessments go in the grade book? But they're little micro moments of assessment, and they're used to tell us what is our next step. Do we move on to do more learning, or do we pull back and reframe our learning, reframe our instruction so the students actually get it? Because if we are saying things and the students are not receiving that information and internalizing it, they're not learning. So why are we going to move on to a quiz? Why are we going to move on to a test when we don't even know if they're doing anything with it?
This is a key part of differentiation in your classroom. It should be, right? Because if you are following this process where you do these little checks over the course of a class period or a school day, you can adjust in little micro movements that sometimes bigger than micro movements to address individual students and really hit them where they are in their learning, and giving them those little nudges to help them get past whatever it is that they're being hung up on, or giving those students who are, moving along at that clip that would be a dream for some teachers, giving those students the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into something that they're interested in that's aligned with what you're covering, but giving them a chance to do some exploration that they might enjoy because they've mastered whatever it is that you're looking for. So what if these are the formative pieces of embedded assessments? What are some strategies that we can use to really pull them into our classroom? What are some of what are some ways beyond like, please answer these 5 questions after you've finished reading this selection?
Yeah, so I like to go through the speaking, listening, reading, writing, which are different domains of language, and go through each of those, right? So
wait, not just like in a science class.
No.
Or in a math class?
In all classes.
Or, okay.
100% in all classes.
Yeah. Just checking. English teacher here, because it is absolutely critical that we're doing these in every single course.
Class. And yes, as a science teacher, I am absolutely speaking, listening, reading, writing. It is not just a language arts or English class domain. No, we should be doing it in absolutely every classroom. And that's the way we know that students are actually communicating. So learning, ingesting, and then communicating this information. Are they able to communicate their information? So I've learned a fact. Tell me that fact again. So first of all, can you tell me that fact? Can we write it down? And pull out some markers. Let's put it on a chart. Let's put it in our KWL charts. Let's write it down in different ways, because we need to activate those different parts of our brains. Yeah. We tell a friend, we're listening to our friends speak. Did you make a mistake? Did you repeat that fact to me? Or did you give me that explanation? Was that correct? Or, oh, whoa, I heard something totally wrong. I'm sure that's not what we learned, right? So getting the students to listen to each other. And then having them read it, and because it's not just a one-time thing. Can I now see it in context, not where the teacher is explaining? Because how many times do we as teachers explain something in the words that we know our students can hear and understand, but then they go to a test and they're like,
no transfer.
I've never seen this word before.
Yeah.
What the heck is a consumer, right? We get these vocabulary words because now we're seeing it in a different context, in different language. And so getting the students to access this information in different ways and then repeat it back to you. That's all you have to do. And this is one thing that we need to remember as teachers. There's a difference between assessment and grading.
And that I'd love to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because, traditionally, we think if a student has done something, we need to give them something in exchange, right? And that often looks like a grade that you put in a grade book. But if you don't grade it, then what is it doing? Like what are you giving students, or what are students getting from that work if you're not putting it in the grade book?
Yeah. So, and this is where we can give feedback.
Aha. So they're getting something. It's just not a grade. Well, but grades can be feedback.
Grades can be feedback. A lot of times, though, grades for students are not feedback whatsoever. You have to teach kids what the different grades mean. And so when you start from, and I've taught down from kindergarten up through upper middle school, there's a point in learning where, did I get a check? Oh, that's great. I got a check. Did I get a smiley face? Well, it wasn't really a smiley face. It was kind of a straight face. Like, what does that mean? So we have different levels of meaning. But then when they start getting grades, which in my last district, it was third grade. That was the first time they start getting grades. And you're like, okay, I got a B.
What does that
mean? I have no meaning behind what that is. I know a smiley face makes me happy. I know a sticker makes me really happy, but I don't know what a B means. And that's when you can go into the points and you can say, well, this is an A, this is a B. But then there's no meaning behind what is the difference between a B and what's the difference between a C. And if I get a D, is that a bad thing? And if I get an F, is that a bad thing? So for a lot of students, grades are not feedback. And a lot of times it really isn't feedback for even into high school, because are they even looking at it? You give the quiz back or the test back and I got a B, it goes away.
Yeah.
Am I doing anything with it? Does it force me to review what I've missed? Does it force me to learn from it? And so assessment and feedback should be a motivating factor that gets us to want to do something more, or not necessarily even want to, that we need to learn something more, that we need to review, that we need to relearn. So if we are striving for A's and we get a B, we miss something.
And that then the communication that it's not just the B, it's the you got two wrong here. Let's dig into those two.
Why did you get it wrong?
Yeah, to
because
figure out where
to get things wrong.
Right.
And I'm not saying that everyone needs to get A's. I am not saying that at all. I am not that teacher that A is our milestone.
Right, but you're trying to root out the misconceptions. You're trying to root out what needs to, where can we help students improve their understanding of whatever skill or whatever concept it is that you're trying to teach.
Yep. And more importantly, I think it's feedback for the teacher. This is where the
wait a minute. This is a mind shift for a lot of it. It's changing your mindset from recognizing that the work that students are doing is also a reflection on what you are teaching.
100%. It's what you're teaching, because it's not just about what they're getting, because we have to remember communication is a two-way street. I speak, you listen. I speak, you take in information. And so assessments of any type, whether it's a writing or a quiz or whatever, that tells me, did you hear what I said? Did you internalize what we learned? And it's not just, and I'm not just saying I just have to speak and say everything, but this was the standard that we were trying to get. This was the objective of the lesson. Did you get it, or did you have holes? And then when I'm looking at the entire class, and I can say, well, you missed number 4 and you missed number 4 and he missed number 4 as well. That's not their issue. That's my issue.
it's now a space where I need to resolve that misunderstanding for them.
Right.
I'm not just going to say, go back and reread this again, because they didn't get it when they read it the first time. So it is feedback for me as an educator to say, okay, whatever it was that they read about this idea didn't sink in.
It didn't sink in.
For whatever reason, whether it was, vocabulary that they didn't understand that we hadn't practiced before and other kids had, experienced that elsewhere in their lives, or whether they were absent that day, or, there's millions of reasons why the communication didn't make it to the end point. But it's our job then to do that differentiation work, to allow for students to see content in a different way, see practice skills in a different way, to address that they got number 4 wrong, and so did their neighbor, and so did the kid over there.
Well, and here's one thing that becomes a barrier to that is when we give, let's say, multiple choice or short answer. I know I've done this because it's easy. Don't you put the papers out side by side and you're just looking at one row? You're not even looking at the name and you're just check. Did they get this right? Did they get this right?
Yep.
So now we're not actually looking at anything other than the grade. So now we're counting, okay, you got 7 right. So 7 out of 10 is a 70%. They got 8 out of 10, but we're not actually looking at the information. We're putting the assessment on the student. Did the student achieve or not? Versus if I get the student to maybe explain a little bit more, or I even look into data such as how much time did they spend on this test? How much time did they spend on each question? That's all information that I could be taking. But if I just rush through and grade everything, I'm not actually looking at it. So then that begs the question, am I grading too much? Am I giving too many assessments? Am I trying to do too much? Because we do those shortcuts as teachers because we've got this stack of papers this big that we need to grade, and we need to get through them as fast as possible. So we give easier assessments. But then are we giving busy work? Are we just putting grades in the grade book? Or are we using that to differentiate and to drive our instruction?
So what I'm hearing in all of this is that we really need to be giving students opportunities for them to see where they are and for us to also see where they are, right? Like we need to kind of have multiple opportunities for feedback, whether that's feedback on how we are doing to convey the information or support students in learning that information in whatever way we are doing that, or for students to understand, here's where I am in my learning, and this is what I need to do next. What does that look like if we're not going to constantly, if we say, like, I want to do this a lot so that students can get lots of feedback, but I don't have time in my life to do all of that grading? What are some other ways that we can provide feedback that is useful to students, and some other ways that we can receive the feedback without having to sit down with the pen and the paper or, on our screens checking work until our eyes are red?
Right. Well, there's a couple different ways that I've used or that I've seen being used. One of them, obviously, is have the students grade it in class, right? So we can then say, thumbs up, thumbs down. Students are grading it. They're grading a partner. It doesn't even matter what the grade ends up, because I'm not putting in the grade book. So if they're helping
the grading
their friend,
is still, it's a discovery. It's a feedback situation.
And you can say, did everyone get this? Did your partner get this right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. And if they didn't, let's stop and talk about it right there. So now we can talk about it as it's going along until I do my next assessment. The other one are the assignments that have embedded grading. And this is one thing I know my son's math teacher used all the time, which he didn't understand the purpose. And I was like, that's genius. It's the coloring, even in middle school, where you have to color all of these answers. Anything that the answer is 1/2, it's going to be blue. And anything that the answer is over 1, it's going to be red. And so in the end, there's a picture. So you can look at that picture, and if there is miscoloring, it's not the right image, then you know
you
there's
made a
an issue.
mistake there. And that's a quick glance for anybody.
And I didn't even have to look at the 25 questions that
Right.
were on it. I can just see what was graded. Another thing that I actually love, especially for something like multiple choice, we spend so much time grading multiple choice questions when there are so many programs out there that have auto grading for it.
It's right there for you.
It's right there.
Done.
It is an automatic thing to where the student answers the question and right away they know whether it's right or wrong. Immediately. That is feedback. And then those same programs allow the teacher to get that same feedback. So it doesn't matter if it's a Kahoot where you can see right away, which is a great way as well. The students give an answer and you can see 90% got this question right. Move on to the next one. 20% got this right. We gotta work on this question.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's a program like an online grading platform, like
Propello,
maybe. I mean, I spend so much time writing assessments and really focusing on assessments and giving the feedback right away so the teachers don't have to do that.
And that can help them then drive the instruction to the next step, to the next level for every student individually.
Right.
What about students tracking their information on their own?
I think that is so important. I firmly believe in data and looking at data. And, we say this all the time as teachers and we have data meetings. Students need to be part of this as well. So having a chart in their notebook that says, I am improving. So even if it's line graph, bar graph, I don't even care what the chart is. As long as the students are tracking their own data, they can see if they improved. And then the numbers don't matter. The number doesn't matter if they got a 40 and then they got a 50%, or they got an 80 or a 90%. That's showing growth and improvement.
And that's feedback for them. It's to see that progress over time.
Yes. And of course, we always did data binders and charts, and we drew a line at what was considered passing, or what was the objective. We're trying to
meaning objective,
which is usually around 70%. So we would have the students draw a line around 70%. But when you are constantly getting F, that gives no feedback.
Right.
But if I can look at a number and I can say, I got 15 on this one, 15%, I got a 20%, I got a 30%, I'm showing growth.
Right.
So I'm doing something right. So whatever I'm doing, I can keep doing. And that's what we want to do. We want the assessment. We want the feedback to drive some sort of an action. Keep doing what you're doing. Do something different. And that is for the students and the teachers. We should be doing something with this. What are you going to do afterwards? We should be doing something with it.
Okay, so let's talk now about intentional design. I know that sometimes we're using whatever's been handed to us, right? Sometimes it's the district has developed this curriculum and this is what we're going to use. Sometimes we're using a box set curriculum where everything is done for us. But sometimes, actually a lot of times, we need to develop assessments a little bit more uniquely for the needs of our classroom in one way or another. It might be that we're taking pre-written questions, but we're, picking and choosing to make sure that we're hitting all the pieces that we actually covered in class, right? Sometimes it is getting a little bit more granular. I want to talk about making sure that we know how to formulate good assessments. And again, it doesn't need to be pre-tests, post-tests, quizzes. It can be any kind of assessment, anything where we're checking students' understanding. But if the checking of understanding is not built in a way that is going to give you valid data, then your data is not going to be valid. And one of the things that I know from my experience in the classroom, even teaching in a school where assessment was a huge part of what we were doing day in and day out, I didn't realize what I I didn't know what I didn't know
Right.
while I was in the classroom until I moved out and focused every day on writing great assessments and learning those best practices. So I want to kind of share a little bit about what great assessments can look like and how they can help you, move forward in your classroom.
So wait, first, is it look at a test and see if there's 10 questions because it's easy to grade?
Well, I mean, sometimes you want to give short ones. Like that's not always a bad thing, but that's not your primary criteria. I think let's talk about it just from the scope of the entire process. And then we can talk about the individual pieces of how you would develop a good question. So obviously the whole program, it's really helpful to use pre-testing or diagnostics because you may, get to a unit and half of the kids already know it because it's something that they cared about. If you're learning about prehistoric time periods, you might have 25% of the kids in your class know every single one of them and the what happened and what was alive in those time periods because they loved dinosaurs when they were in first and second grade. And now we're in fourth or fifth grade and they haven't forgotten that stuff.
Dinosaur train.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those pteranodons.
Yeah.
So they get stuff stuck in your brain. So you may not have to teach all of that stuff to that group of students, and they can focus on digging deeper into that information while you do teach it to the kids who are like, well, I wasn't a dinosaur trained kid. I don't know these things, right? So not only are you seeing where you're going to drive your class, where you're going to kind of help guide students, but you're also using that to activate students' excitement for what's coming next and to connect to, again, what they already know. So pre-tests are really important. We talked about all of the other pieces of formative assessment within your classroom. And then, of course, we have whatever summative assessment you want to use, which a lot of times can be that piece that you actually do put in the grade book. And if we're thinking about, being equitable in our grading, we probably don't want to put all of the growth as like the piece that drives what their final score is going to be. We want to show here's where you finally got it.
Right.
And this is how much of it you got. But there are some other kinds of assessments that I think can be really, really useful for students. And they're not necessarily the quick grade, but they are absolutely authentic. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about the project-based assessments that you've developed over the last few years.
Yeah. So I am very much a project person, but I am not the project person where we finished a unit. Now let's give you a project to just show what you know.
Okay.
Or it's the end of the year and there's nothing else to do. So we're going to give 25,000 projects to go home and bring back. What I think a project-based assessment is it starts with our standards. And if we look at our standards, the standards are no longer just about knowledge, but it's about the application of knowledge. So our instruction and our assessment can be done actually at the same time through little checkpoints. So when we look at standards, they are strongly focused on verbs. So it's not just know the different types of an ecosystem. It would be apply your knowledge or compare two different ecosystems. And so those are all verbs that we're working on. And so that would mean that both our assessment, our instruction needs to be active, needs to be something that we're doing that. So when we look at project-based assessments, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what the students need to know how to do by the end. So instead of just giving them a test at the end and say, do you know this information? Can you apply this information? I'm going to give them parallel assignments ahead of time. So if at some point they're going to have to collect data on water quality, I'm going to have them collect data on something, a simulation in the classroom. So that way I know that they can do this.
So they can do the verb.
They can do whatever it is, whatever the action. So they can do whatever action they need to do. And then when I know that they are capable of doing this and they're successful, then they can move on to the next piece.
Aha.
So then the next piece might be to research. And I'm going to make sure that they're going to research different aspects of ecosystems or invasive species. And because they're going to need to know this at the end. So in stage 2, they're going to research. I can stop and use that as a checkpoint. Were they able to get this information? Were they able to collect the information that they need so they can be successful? So now the step 3 is another section. So basically, instead of just giving them a project at the end to say, you've learned all of this, now do it. We're guiding them through the project so they have all their tools. So it's almost like a scavenger hunt, right? We're collecting the tools along the way.
Over time.
I have assessed that they were successful on that. So then when they put together their final paper, their final report, they have all the pieces already. And I know that they've been successful on all these pieces. Or I can stop and say, those were not invasive species, or I was looking for invasive species in Tennessee.
Let's time out. Let's stop you right here before you go all the way to the end with native species that you weren't supposed to be talking about. I can use this as like a little guardrail to reteach, relearn, adjust, and then move on. And that is not only formative assessment, but it's formative assessment that builds to a final assessment.
Yeah. And so at the end, I should not get to the end. No one should fail that assignment. No one should. I should not get to any end, any summative assessment, not knowing that every single one of my students can be successful on this test or on this assessment. So for a project-based assessment, that's what we're doing. We break it into sections. We do piece by piece. I can assess, I can support, I can guide. And then at the end, all they're doing is putting it all together. So now you're really putting together what you've learned and you're presenting your information. You're creating a model after you've already created a model and remodeled and added to it. So I know that you've been successful. And then the final project, really, it's not the big piece, it's the small piece. Now that you've done it, here you go. Just sum it all up in a tidy little bow. And I love it. I think it's great, but it does take a little bit of rethinking because we're starting the project at the beginning.
Yeah, you have to be prepared and recognize that you may have to take some detours to then get back on that road, but it allows for students to move through and feel supported while doing authentic work.
Right. And you know what I've done? So I created a whole bunch of project-based assessments because, again, I firmly believe that that's how we need to go because we're applying our knowledge. But section 1 of all these assessments, and I don't want to just keep harping on the ones that I made, but
you should be proud of them. They're fantastic.
Section 1 is all activating prior knowledge and it's asking questions about the topic. And this is where I know whether or not my students are prepared to even do the project. So when I have them compare different types of waves, or if I'm having them compare regular and irregular polygons in math, I know, do they know that word? Do they know that vocabulary? And I can front load vocabulary, but I don't have to spend a whole lot of time teaching this if they know it. Or I can just pull Amanda over to the back table and we're going to go over these words. Like, you didn't actually understand the difference between regular and irregular polygons. So let's go over this. But I don't have to stop the whole class in their learning and say, okay, class,
nobody's moving on until
we have some questions about regular and irregular polygons, but we don't.
Right.
I mean, it's only 1 or 2 kids. So this is where I'm using that embedded assessment to formulate what I'm going to do with the students. I'm letting other kids move on to section 2 while I give a little prep work for some students, and then they're able to move on to section 2.
So what I am hearing, and it's actually kind of just dawning on me also, is that project-based assessments can sound like overwhelmingly difficult for a teacher who's got a large classroom.
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, if they are developed with really clear guardrails, they're probably one of the easiest things that you can do in a large classroom, because you're able to say, you move on to step 2 or step 3, and I'm going to take you and you back here. We're going to, revise this so that you can better understand what you need to do next. And then they'll eventually catch up and everybody will be moving along, or maybe they're a step or 2 slower, but that doesn't matter because you're not necessarily like trying to get a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And you can allow for students to move at the pace that is right for them. While also learning the pieces of the assignment, the pieces of the unit that are critical to their success in, broader standardized tests.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other strategies for teachers who are like, I just don't know how to continue to do this. I have 35 kids in my class or more, and it's just a lot. This data is a lot. How can I pare it down or conquer it in a way that is useful and isn't, making students devalue the work that I'm asking them to do?
So one of the things I think is important, and this is relying on your team, because we're going to be assessing, we need to calibrate assessments as a team, because a lot of what we do, especially if we're working on project-based assessment, anything that's not objective in terms of one right answer, if it's or short answer, if it's anything that requires explanation, anything that requires like a project where you're going to have differing opinions, we need to calibrate it together. So we need to actually talk as a team and say, what does a right answer look like? What are some acceptable limits? And this is where our rubrics come in to say, this is a better answer. If they say this is a level 3, this is a level 2, this is a level 1. So having rubrics along with those assessments where it's already done, the students know what those rubrics are. So once we've calibrated and developed a rubric together as a team, we're first going to make sure that your class and my class gets the same type of grading because they've met the same objectives. If you've done 3 out of 4 of these things, you get a 3, which is great, versus, oh, you did a great job.
Right.
So
check plus,
because Carlos did a
86%.
great job on this. Right. So calibrating it and making sure that we are on the same page. We're teaching our kids the same way, and that the students are part of that assessment. They know, what does it take to show mastery? What does it take to show that you really need a lot of improvement or you need support from the teacher? And so for students to be able to look at the rubric and to grade themselves first before it gets to the teacher, I think that's important as well. So having students as part of that process, and that it doesn't all fall on just that one teacher. It's a team of teachers, whoever's teaching this together, and the students are grading themselves as well. They're assessing whether or not they are understanding, because they'll tell you if I don't get it.
Absolutely, they will.
I have no idea what you said. And you can say, you weren't paying attention, or, well, no, I was paying attention. I just really did not get what you said. And they will tell you.
And that's your feedback.
Right.
That's your formative assessment.
Yeah.
As an educator. I hope that this conversation can help you to apply some of these strategies in your classroom to help you gather the data in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming, that feels like it's something that you can do, that can help drive your instruction and the choices that you're making as a teacher and the choices that your students are making. If you like this conversation, please like or subscribe to Education Uncharted. Give us some feedback, give us some comments, ask some questions. We are happy to respond back and tell you, what we think, share the knowledge that we have. Or maybe you want to share some information that you know about using formative assessments in your classroom.
It shouldn't just be a one-sided conversation. Amanda and I, we're talking and talking and talking, and it's great. But we do want to hear what your thoughts are.
So thank you all for listening. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is Education Uncharted.